Two great wars of the gods were recorded in Gaelic tradition. The second war was between the Tuatha Dé, gods of art, society, and kingship, and the Fomorians, the destructive giants who took 2/3 of the produce of the land and who turned the gods into slaves, having the great Dagda raising fortresses and digging ditches, and Ogma carrying firewood. But the first great battle, led by Nuada Ergilaf, was against a group called the Fir Bolg. But who exactly are they? Hi friends, I'm Kevin McLean. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and consider supporting me on Patreon. The Fir Bolg means men of the bags, and there is a narrative behind that name. They, along with the Tuatha Dé, were descendants of Nevid. Now the narrative is not complete and not entirely to be believed. It's heavily altered by Christian chronology and religion, but there does seem to be a semblance of the original myth that can be perhaps cautiously reconstructed from the different euphemized strands. Nevid refers to a sacred grove, known in classical sources from the continent and place names as a nematon. Its root is most likely the Gaelic nave, which comes from Proto-Celtic nemos, meaning sky or heaven, from Indo-European nebos, referring to clouds, and giving us Latin nebula. The Nevid was thus a sacred space that was connected to the sky. As the story goes, Nevid came and fought a battle with the Fomorians and captured Ireland, but was killed in a subsequent battle, and his children were driven out. Some of those children went north to the 4 sacred islands, identified with 4 different treasures of the Tuatha Dé. They mastered arts and magic, but others went east to seek refuge in Greece, or in some folktale versions, to Spain. These children were enslaved by the local population and were forced to do great tasks of labor in the land. They were said to transform mountains of stone into flat, fertile fields with blooming flowers. To do this, they used great leather bags that they fashioned in order to carry the mud, dirt, and clay to form the land. These beings became known as the Fir Bolg, the men of the bags, for the great bags of earth that they were forced to carry in order to arrange the landscape and to create fertile plains. They eventually escaped their bondage and sailed to Ireland using the same leather bags that they hauled earth with, thus inventing the corach, a type of Gaelic boat made of hides. They arrived on the 1st of August, Lunasa, a date associated with the beginning of harvest and prosperity. Now, even in this euphemized Christian version, it's fairly easy to see that this was not a task set to mortal men. These were earth-shaping deities. Their kings were called the sons of Dela, meaning teat or udder. They were identified as having 3 distinct tribes, but as being fundamentally the same nature. The Fir Bolg is one. This refers to ones who tunneled in the deep places of the earth, who dug out the trenches and rivers. Dolmen here means deep, so men of the deep. The Fir Bolg, the ones who raised mountains and created plains with their bags. The Gaelion, meaning something like abounding in javelins, identified as being warriors, but other than that their distinct role isn't clear. They might be associated with wind, as it is sometimes described as a spear. Their kings are identified as Slanga, meaning sound dart, Rudraiga, meaning fierce rush, Gan, scarcity, Shangan, meaning long-standing scarcity, Fehu Kenindan, little white-headed raven, Rindal, pointed weapon, Ovgen, liking knotted branches. And their wives were Aust, Liban, and Ether, which have difficult etymologies, but also Cnucha, hillock, and Fuad, meaning a briar for carrying the dead, and these are easily transparent. Of Rindal it is said that there were no points upon spears before him, and of Ovgen it says that there were no knots in the wood of trees, and that they all grew straight and tall before his coming. In the early glossaries, the name Gan appears, explained as the wasteland of Greece, namely an adverse place beneath the earth, seeming to refer to Hades or Tartarus. None of these kings was said to have ruled longer than a handful of years, showing their ineptitude. They first divided Ireland into 5 provinces, but this doesn't seem to be an accomplishment, but a sign of weakness. Though in Ireland there were many tribal kings, the ideal king was the one high king, the one who would unite the land, and figures associated with dividing the land were not looked upon favorably. Yet a glorious king did eventually rise up to rule them, who is said to have brought law and good rule, one named Echi, son of Eirc. Eirc may mean a red-eared or spotted cow, but it also glosses as heaven in Cormac's glossary. He was married to the queen of the Fir Bolg, Taltu. His name means horseman, and it's also a regular name given to the Dagda, known also as Echi Ol Ahar. It was said that under his rule it never rained, but that heavy dew came and watered the earth, and that the crops never once failed under him. Then the Tuatha Dé came to Ireland in dark clouds and magic showers of rain led by Nuada Erigidlav. They landed in the mountains of Connacht and sent Bress out to meet with the people of the land and offer them a just settlement. Share Ireland between them equally, or battle. When Bress meets Shreng, their champion, he is impressed by the size and strength. He carries a huge, mighty, broad-pointed spear, stout and heavy. But King Echi rejects the deal, saying if half of Ireland is given over, the Tuatha Dé will soon have the whole thing. Battle preparations are made, and strange preparations they are, for the plan of Nuada is to fight on entirely equal footing, with the same weapons and same numbers, and it is even said that the Fir Bolg, lacking proper good weapons, had weapons made for them by the smiths of the Tuatha Dé, so balanced and noble was the conflict. Though the Tuatha Dé landed in Ireland on May 1st, it is 6 weeks after when the battle actually begins. Thus, the first battle of Magh Tuiredh takes place on the summer solstice, halfway through the quarter year of summer. The fighting is intense and both sides lose many men. Finally, Nuada goes forth into battle surrounded by his 12 champions, incarnation of strength and battle prowess. He and the rest of the Tuatha Dé face down the Fir Bolg warriors. After several days of fighting, Nuada confronts Shreng. He deals the warrior 7 mighty blows, but Shreng retaliates with a strike that cleaves through Nuada's shield and cuts his arm off at the shoulder. Yet it is the Tuatha Dé who emerge victorious, though just barely. The secret to their victory seems to have been the judgment of Nuada. He had lost his arm in the fight, and when Shreng challenges him to single combat, Nuada accepts, but only if Shreng will bind his arm so that the balance of fairness of combat can be maintained. Shreng refuses this, so instead a peace is made. The Fir Bolg accept to take one of the provinces of Ireland and friendship with the Tuatha Dé, rather than fight one-handed on Nuada's terms. This episode likely relates to a very ancient Indo-European custom, and parallels can be found in Roman and Vedic sources, as noted by George Dumazil in his great analysis in his work Mitra Varuna. But who are these Fir Bolg that Nuada fights with? What is this force that rivals the Tuatha Dé in strength and are defeated instead through a type of archaic custom? Their king is praised by poets, After he is killed, the Fir Bolg queen Taltu is remarried to one of the lords of the Tuatha Dé, also named Echi Gurav, who then fosters the victorious child Lugh. This seems rather suspicious, especially since Bo Jerag is sometimes said to be the son of Echi Gurav, and other times said to be the son of the Dagda, who is also known as Echi. The story of what happens after this peace with the Fir Bolg, however, is perhaps most illuminating. When the Fir Bolg are defeated, the story then moves directly on to giving details not about the treaty formed between the Fir Bolg and the Tuatha Dé, but between the Tuatha Dé and the Fomorians. That alliance is cemented with the union of Cian, son of Dian Cecht, and Ethu, daughter of Balor, a great king and battle champion of the Fomorians. Yet no narrative is given of the Tuatha Dé and the Fomorians ever meeting previous to this, let alone establishing the connections for a formal alliance through marriage. Then, inexplicably, the son of that treaty-forming union is given to Taltu, queen of the Fir Bolg, to foster a completely third party, which is highly unusual. Perhaps our first clue is with Dela, said many times to be the ancestor of the Fir Bolg. Yet this same Dela is cited in a separate section of the same text as the father of Mork. During the invasion of Nevid, several battles were fought with the forces of the Fomorians, including the defeat of Gan and Shangan, named not as Fir Bolg, but Fomorians. Yet they were not alone. The Fomorians were in possession of a mysterious tower that loomed in the sea, visible only during low tide. It was the fortress of Conan, said to be located at Torinish, perhaps Tory Island, famous for another tower, the Tower of Balor. Nevid manages to overcome the tower and defeats Conan. Yet not long after the victory, Mork comes from across the sea to avenge the defeat. He destroys Nevid's forces entirely, forcing the survivors to flee, which is where our story of the Fir Bolg began. Yet Mork, clearly identified as a Fomorian, is called the son of Dela, the same figure identified as the father of the Fir Bolg kings. Conan is called a son of Feber, whose name also appears as a Fir Bolg, the son of Slange. It seems that the story of Nevid's invasion is repeated under a different guise, with Nevid supplanted by the name of Nuada. Both are said to have been married to Magh, and both may in origin refer to the same god. The repeated stories of invasions is only a mask over original deities, transforming them into ancestral figures in order to fit with the Christian timelines of biblical creation myth and the ages of the world. This is supported also in that the king of the Fir Bolg, Echi, is said to be killed by the sons of Nevid, and the story of the battle relates this. But, according to the story's own timeline, this is more than 200 years after Nevid has died. This element is carried over likely because it was well established that the sons of Nevid killed the Fir Bolg king, and so these figures are resurrected in order to fit with this, despite it being entirely out of place. What exactly the original story is cannot be reconstructed here, but what is clear is that it isn't what is presented in the text, though the text reflects elements of it, repeated several times over. What appears to be the case is that the Fir Bolg are in fact identical with the Fomorians. Now this is not something that I anticipated to find through my research, and I have always assumed and stated that they were in fact distinct. But on closer inspection, that distinction seems to be a literary creation that is not even consistently upheld within the text of the Laur Gvala Éireann itself. The Fir Bolg, associated with forming the earth and with the generation of the abundance which emerges from the soil, are adversarial to the Tuatha Dé. They appear to represent the untamed raw powers of the earth, which must be harnessed and controlled by man, represented by conflict with the gods of art and skill. But they also seem to represent openly harmful and hostile forces, so it isn't simply that they represent specifically the earth as such, but as all kind of oppositional forces. In ancient social terms, the Fir Bolg were the serf class who works the land, in contrast to the bringers of arts, represented by the Tuatha Dé. The Fomorians then are another name for them, or possibly a specific class of them. Recall the threefold division that is given about the separate tribes of the Fir Bolg. Now, the first group that Tuatha or Nevid fights may be the Fir Bolg of the surface earth that are detailed in the story, but the later Fomorians who come to fight the Tuatha Dé or Nevid later, Mork or Balor, are possibly of a different branch. The Fomorian king Indech is called Magh Tuiredh. I had believed this to mean the son of the god of oppression, but Tuiredh might be identical to the Fir Bolg. Replace men of the deep with god of the deep, and you have Indech representing this class of deity, the forces of the Underworld. The Fomorians are represented as the direct parents or ancestors of various gods. Elitha, meaning skill, is called a Fomorian king, but is also the father of Dagda, Bres, Alod, Ogma, and Delvaith. Balor is the father of Ethlu, a name relating to kernel or seed, who is the mother of several of the most important gods, such as Dagda and Lugh. There are also some hints in untranslated sections of the Second Battle of Magh Tuiredh that the Fomorians were thought to control agriculture. Balor talks about Lugh riding to encounter the seeds that he sowed. Lugh says that he will send a flood upon Balor's field, that he is a peasant damaging the world, and that rather than plunder, he ought to be generating tribute to the gods generation after generation. In the Fomorians' surrender to Lugh, it is said that by lowly dreg people, the flowers will be made to bloom and milk and tree fruit will be plentiful. Bres also vows to teach secrets of agriculture and promises many other miracles related to agriculture, such as harvest in every season, things that the Tuatha Dé turned down, opting to enforce the normal cosmic order of the seasons. The very basis of the Second Battle of Magh Tuiredh is related to agriculture, both preventing the Fomorians from destroying or taking the produce, and acquiring farming secrets. This matches the Welsh story related to the Battle of the Trees, where Amaethon, a god of agriculture, Gwydion, and Lle do battle with underworld forces due to the theft of the wealth of the underworld, also seemingly the origin of the conflict between Gwydion and Pryderi, a figure cognate perhaps with Bres. The queen of the Fir Bolg is Taltu, a name likely derived from Proto-Indo-European tal, meaning flat, found in other Gaelic words like talov, meaning earth, making her name directly related to the earth. She is the daughter of Mag Mor, the Great Field, and there can be little question that she is a goddess of the earth. She is their queen, and is captured and then remarried to the Tuatha Dé, and then fosters one of the most important kings of the gods, the one who would bring the total defeat to the Fomorians. Her death comes as the result of a great effort at clearing the field that bears her name, but was commemorated by Lugh, her foster son, Every Lunasa, which was also called Bron Trogan, the sorrow of the earth. For that was when the earth, through great effort, bore up the fruits that were to be harvested and taken from her. This general Lunasa theme repeats across Ireland, but it was not always related to a figure named Taltu. It often concerns a female goddess associated with the land in that local area, a local manifestation of the same goddess, it could be said. But in other locations, the way it plays out is different. A goddess called Carmen comes with her sons and takes a sap from the trees. They are specifically identified as Fomorians. Lugh and his band defeat them, and then Lugh has Carmen sealed in a cage beneath the earth and makes Brest to dig a hole to put her in it. She is kept as a guarantee that her destructive offspring do not come back, but dies in her underground prison. An oak tree is planted above her, which grows great-mast. But in other stories, it is Lugh's own wives who die, Bui and Nas, both referring to goddesses associated with the land of separate locales. He then leads the Gaels in a funeral procession for them, and holds games. In all events, a goddess associated with the land, and often with Lugh, dies on the day through producing the harvest of the earth, and honor is given to her through festivities. Yet in origin, the day seems to have also been the day of the wedding of Lugh, and a celebration of his victory over the Fomorians. This is how it is described by Cuchulainn in The Wooing of Ever. This explains why Lugh's victory and marriage is celebrated on Lunasa. But it also fits perfectly with the general conclusion of the battle and the victory address given by the poet of the Fomorians, who says that it will be celebrated through time in feasts and games. Lunasa is a day that commemorates Lugh's victory over the Underworld forces, which secures the harvest for the tribe. The figures most connected with Lunasa, other than Lugh, are the Fir Bolg. In Greek myth, the name of the giants means earthborn. They were children of Gaia, who is often vengeful towards the gods. After all, the gods represent forces of order and control exerted over a sometimes chaotic and deadly world. The Fir Bolg are envisioned as enslaved forgers of the world, but also bringers of prosperity, as they control the underworld forces and the productivity of the soil. This is why local traditions around Lunasa also know of a figure called Crom Dubh, who would appear to be a dark, chthonic figure, perhaps even related to the figure of Balor. In folklore, Balor desires to grow many trees on his island, and recruits Cian to help him do it. But Balor keeps his daughter, Ethu, meaning kernel or seed, locked away, never to produce offspring. This is similar to the Welsh giant Ysbaddaden, whose daughter makes flowers grow in her footsteps, but will not relinquish her. It seems to pertain to a god who has control over the fertility of the earth, and will not relinquish it without a fight. The Tuatha Dé arrive in Ireland at the first day of summer, signifying the onset of the fertile season. The Fir Bolg strive with the Tuatha Dé during the course of the summer, with the culmination of their first battle just after the summer solstice. The powers of light have conquered for a time. But then autumn comes, and the harvest. The sun is fading in strength. The second Battle of Magh Tuiredh is said to take place at Samhain, despite elements of the story seeming to correspond to Lunasa. In any event, the symbolic meaning of the dating given is the onset of winter, the decline of the sun, and the ascendancy of dark powers. The Fir Bolg, who transform the mountains into flowering pastures, are like the land itself, a power that needs to be contended with and controlled by humans. The Fir Bolg Queen is directly linked with the bringing of the harvest and creating the field which the commemorative games were played upon. But this festival is also associated with a myth of Lugh subduing them, forcing them to relinquish the harvest, just as it is preserved in the case of the second Battle of Magh Tuiredh. In some areas, this was through violence, and in others through a kind act of a foster mother. But in both cases, Lugh presides over this transfer of wealth from the underworld to man. To him, Loch Legolas, the poet of the Fomorians, sang the decree of fastening, which promised the Fomorians would not rise up against him again, that milk would come to cattle, that the trees would bear fruit, and the grains would rise and ripen, and that Lugh would rule over all disputes. It has often been said that the Fir Bolg represent a pre-Celtic population. Hopefully this video has dispelled that notion. They are a fundamental part of the cosmology and are spirits of the earth, chaotic beings that are often harmful to man, which are combated and controlled by the gods of art, gods of the sky. This is highlighted as Nuada and his forces arrive in Ireland coming in clouds. However, in the general Indo-European social structure, the Fir Bolg represent peasants or slaves, and it's possible that certain elements of actual historical warfare between a local population and the incoming Indo-European invaders influenced the telling of the myth. Yet it need not take an invasion and subjugation of a local population to craft such a narrative. The toil against the forces of nature was a daily struggle for everyone in the ancient past. We often romanticize nature now because we are viewing it through thick windows, in heated homes, with food bought at supermarkets often. The reality of nature is brutal, and for humans, only our intellect provided us the tools to survive against its harshness. Those many crafts and skills were the gifts of the gods to men that allowed them to survive against the many monsters that sought their deaths. Cold, drought, sickness, starvation, deformity, and the list goes on and on. Though awe-inspiring and powerful, much found in nature is deadly to man, and in a purely natural state, without the intellect to guide action, man would surely die. The struggle between the gods and the giants in various traditions represents this ancient struggle. The subjugation of these forces represents the control of man over the earth, over the elements, but also of the subjugation of deadly forces of all kinds: disease, plagues, droughts, floods, even death itself in some cases. This is perhaps seldom expressed as clearly as with the Tuatha Dé, the gods of skill and art, of the mind and sky, against the Fir Bolg, gods of earth, ultimately settled by a god who represented both, just as we humans represent both. Well, I hope you enjoyed the video and weren't too confused by it, because ultimately all of this revelation is new to me as well. I'd only discovered it in my research for this particular video, and it even contradicts things that I said just not very long ago in previous videos. So hopefully people can realize that, we don't always get things 100% right, and this is one of those examples. And with Celtic myth, this is very difficult because the sources are extremely contaminated, you could say, with later material and Christian narratives, as I try to detail somewhat in the beginning of this video. So with that said, please give a like, subscribe, consider supporting me on Patreon, because this does take a great deal of time. And as always, stand tall.